for this webinar. Thank you. Thank you. So for quickly moving to the next session is a panel discussion. It is regarding metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer. And I would like Dr. Chirag sir to invite respected Dr. Pankaj Shah. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kshitij. Dr. Pankaj Shah needs no introduction to this audience. He is father figure for medical oncology in our country, and he is mentor to most of us from the medical oncology side as well as the other sides in this audience. So I invite Padma Shri Dr. Pankaj Shah to invite and introduce Dr. Senthil, and then he will invite the panelists and start the panel discussion on CNPC.
Thank you, Chirag. I enjoyed very much the debate. It was the starting of the metastasis. Now, if there is a full-blown metastasis, what to do? And if the patient is hormone sensitive, what are the ways in which we should address this problem? According to the age and life expectancy, according to the type of the metastasis, according to the symptomatic or asymptomatic, etc., etc. And for this, we have got a national professor. As far as this webinar is concerned, probably we should have from ICON or ISMPO, who has addressed webinar maximum time, probably Senthil Rajappa will get in first hand. And with this, because he come prepared and tell something which is useful in the clinic. And at this time, all the people like me who are not reading too much, they will always learn something from Rajappa. Rajappa is a senior medical oncologist, a very nice speaker from Hyderabad. Dr. Rajappa, please.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Chirag, for that opportunity. And sir, as always, you are very kind to me. So it just means that I'm spending all the time in front of the system, not seeing patients. I probably will have to withdraw and start doing more work.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Send patient to me. I will take care.
That's even more. I'm so happy, you have such a lovely sense of humor, sir. Please, you should continue to, be in the midst of all of us, lighten the, setting, and of course, help all of us learn more and better with your long and vast years of experience. Thank you so much. So we'll go on to the panel discussion, which is on metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer. Sahu and Vedang, a lovely debate. We will discuss that even further in this panel discussion. So let me start with this case. A 67-year-old male with lower urinary tract symptoms, diabetic of 20 years, coronary artery disease, had a bypass grafting last year, a year ago, should I say. Ex-smoker, ECOG performance status is 1, rectal examination is a hard nodule in the prostate. His PSA was 110 nanograms per mil. A trust-guided biopsy was done. Gleason 4+4, it was group 4. A PSMA PET was done. Enlarged prostate with multiple pelvic, retroperitoneal, and mediastinal lymph nodes. The largest of them was the retroperitoneal, which is 2 centimeter. The mediastinal lymph node was 1.7 centimeter. So non-regional lymph nodes are lighting up on the PSMA PET scan. A 2D echo was done, and the ejection fraction is 49%. Okay, so non-regional lymph nodes lighting up on the scan. Echo was done, borderline cardiac function. So the final diagnosis is carcinoma prostate, stage 4. He's a diabetic and coronary artery disease. We've got 2 surgeons, Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Keval Patel and Dr. Rupesh. 2 radiation oncologists, Dr. Pooja and Dr. Hemendra, and 2 medical oncologists, Dr. Abhishek and Dr. Randeep. Randeep, anything else that you want to do in terms of investigation for this patient before you decide what is the next step?
Just to optimize, his sugar records and cholesterol.
Sugar is fine, cholesterol is fine. When I say fine, within acceptable limits, should I say?
Our acceptable limits are definitely much more lenient as an oncologist.
Anything else, Randeep? So anything else on the biopsy for immediate management? We are all taken up with molecular profiling. Anything that you would like to do now, or you would say, let's get on with the treatment, do the profiling later?
I presume it is adenocarcinoma.
It is
And there is-
absolutely. So
That's it.
nothing else. Okay. Let's ask a surgeon, Dr. Keval Patel. Is there anything else that you want to do? Any other information that you want to have before we embark into what is to be done for this patient next?
Okay, so one point I would like to make here, sir, is that there's a first degree relative with a history of prostate cancer.
Right.
So preferably we should go for genetic testing if the patient is ready.
Okay, so I think you have seen the slides that I passed on to the organizers. I made some corrections there, Dr. Patel. So I removed that point regarding
Okay.
first degree relative. Never mind, that's all right. But your point is very well taken, that if there is certainly a relative who's got a history of prostate cancer, breast cancer, anything that suggests a BRCA mutation or any other hereditary predisposition to cancer, you obviously need to do a germline. Anything from the presentation that I have showed? Anything else that you want? Nothing.
Nothing, sir.
Excellent. Very good. So we come back to the question that was very hotly debated: high burden versus low burden or risk. Let me ask the medical oncologist first. Abhishek, what is the relevance of this in terms of choosing systemic therapy, Abhishek? We'll ask the surgeons regarding their viewpoint. We'll ask the radiation people regarding their viewpoint. From a systemic therapy standpoint, is there a relevance, high burden, low burden, high risk, poor risk, whatever classification it is?
So the trial for docetaxel told us that using docetaxel would be much more effective in a high risk or high burden disease.
Okay.
That is probably the only relevance. But the androgen deprivation trials which have come up recently show that even those ADTs work equally effective in high risk and high volume diseases. So I am not very sure whether it matters right now or not.
Excellent. Very good. That's the point that I wanted to bring out. Randeep, high burden, low burden, high risk, low risk, relevance in choosing systemic therapies. Prognosis wise, yes, hotly debated and shown.
Has made a very well point. If the discussion is going towards ABI or ENZA, then it doesn't make a difference. If the discussion is going towards DOSI, then we do think whether it is high or low. And I would not like to put a patient of a low burden on DOSI, though it is there in the guidelines that you can use in high burden, low burden. But in my practice, I tend to avoid using docetaxel in a low risk, upfront metastatic hormone sensitive prostate cancer.
Okay, so are you saying that in certain patients, docetaxel, in high burden patients, docetaxel might add over on top or better than the newer anti-androgen agents, Randeep?
No, we don't have the data, Dr.
We
Senthil,
don't have the data. Right.
Data to be very
right. So I think Abhishek and Randeep both have made very important points that there is some relevance, but I think with so many options and all these options doing equally well, the significance in terms of choosing systemic therapies is actually paling away. It's not as important as what it would. Abhishek, our patient is low burden or high burden prostate cancer with the multiple pelvic, retroperitoneal and mediastinal lymph nodes. Would you want to do an EBUS or get some diagnosis from the retroperitoneum, or you would say, okay, it's lighting upon the PSMA PET, so I'm fine to go ahead?
So I'm fine to go ahead.
You're fine to go ahead. Anybody would want to have some histological diagnosis for those distant non-regional lymph nodes, the radiation people, or Dr. Rupesh, Dr. Hemendra, Dr. Pooja, anyone can. All are happy. Everybody says that it is metastatic disease. Okay, so we did an EBUS biopsy from the mediastinal lymph node and it showed prostate cancer. So that was actually confirmed. Okay, let me ask Dr. Rupesh. Dr. Rupesh, what's the relevance of high versus low burden for a surgeon? Dr. Rupesh, are you there? If not, Dr. Rupesh.
Yes. Sorry, sir. I had just unmuted myself.
No problem, Rupesh.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
As a surgeon, whether it is high volume or low volume metastatic disease, yes, it does matter to us. As an initial line of treatment for hormonal point of view, same. But whether we have to, for docetaxel, we have to send the patient to the medical oncologist. If low volume metastatic burden, we ourselves prescribe sometimes medication. So regarding choosing the hormonal treatment.
Yeah, please go ahead. You can talk about that.
Yeah, in particular patient with cardiac history, I would like to go orchidectomy is a simple and cheapest option. But if patient doesn't want, then GnRH antagonist would be my preferred choice as compared to analog.
Excellent. So Dr. Pooja, Dr. Hemendra, any thoughts on low burden, high burden? There was a hot debate. So what is our patient? Would you consider our patient for radiotherapy to the prostate at some point in time?
Sir, the relevance for the low burden or the high risk comes in times when we are thinking of upon adding of any of MDT, any metastatic directed therapy would really play an important role if it's a low burden disease. The second point, the second question where you're asking about this patient, I would consider this patient as a high volume disease because he has a multiple lymph nodes, he has a PSA 110. Probably what we are seeing PSMA as of now is picking the disease which is very much relevant. There may be a lot of micrometastasis also. So to me, it's definitely a high burden disease.
So Dr. Pooja, if you look at the criteria, this reason why I specifically put up this patient is to bring this point up. If you look at the chartered criteria or the latitude criteria, which classifies patients based on risk, it does not talk about lymph nodes at all. So where do we really put this patient based on the criteria?
Exactly.
In terms of prognosis, is this better than bones or is it worse than bones? I think that's where we are getting to ultimately.
Yes, sir, you have actually taken a very controversial case, but the thing is, it's a the burden of disease is quite big. If as a radiation oncologist, I want to give any metastatic directed therapy, like in terms of radiation, the volumes of radiation would be very big because he has mediastinal, retroperitoneal, he has not even just simple pelvic nodes, but he has more extent.
There's somebody who's, please mute. People who are not part of the panel, please mute. Okay, please go ahead, Dr. Pooja. Yes.
So yes, Sanjay. So the point is that even if we think of adding radiation therapy here, if taking it as a very low burden disease, because the number would look little bit low and there is no clarity on the nodal part, but then the volume as a radiation oncologist, if I think, is going to be very huge because there are mediastinal nodes, there are retroperitoneal nodes. So I would. It would look as a low burden, but I would definitely not put it as a low burden. And I think a systemic therapy first upfront would be the best way to manage this patient.
Excellent. And then we'll take it later regarding whether to do radiotherapy or not. Is that right?
Anyway, any point later when he is responding.
Randeep, this is low burden, high burden. What is your opinion?
Dr. Senthil, I agree with you that classical charted criteria was visceral disease and bone mets and extraskeletal and more than 4. But yes, if you have nodal disease, most of us, including, we will classify it as a visceral disease, especially if you have proven this with a mediastinal EBUS. I think there is no doubt. Let us not talk about burden. It is a bit controversial, but I will say it is a high risk by all criteria.
Okay, so though all of you from your judgmental standpoint are absolutely right, when you look at the data, patients, though you're right that you can't put them into a classification base because they really do not fit based on the criteria that are standard used. But if you look at the prognosis for lymph nodal disease is the best. Non-regional lymph nodal disease is the best. So lymph nodal diseases, that's why M1A, M1B is the bone and M1C is visceral. So from a prognostic standpoint, nodes do the best. So they're actually better than, so I wouldn't agree, though you have your opinion, that this should be equated to metastatic disease because these belong to a much better prognostic group compared to visceral disease and even bone disease. But it's okay if you want to consider this as high burden because of the volume, not in terms of prognosis, you are not absolutely wrong there. But that's a point that I wanted to make because this was a confusion then when all of us started looking at chartered criteria and there were always some patients who came with just some lymph nodes here or there. Abhishek or anybody else wants to make a point regarding lymph nodes as a prognostic marker or in terms of defining burden?
So you already said it. I was going
Very
to
good.
tell because I don't know whether we can interchange high risk and high burden.
Very
I
good.
would put it as a high risk disease because looking at the Gleason score, PSA, nodes, this guy is going to fail. He's not going to live for his entire life. Maybe not a high burden disease like Stampede.
Okay, so very good. So from a latitude standpoint, it's again number of bone metastasis more than or equal to 8, visceral metastasis. 2 of these 3 had to be there to say that somebody is poor risk. Okay, let's move on. So the point is that there are always some patients who don't fit into any of these criteria. We had a hot debate regarding oligometastasis. Now you could put this patient anywhere, low risk, high burden, low burden, depending upon your judgment, not based on objective criteria. So that's the important point. Let's come back to our urologist, Dr. Keval Patel. This patient has LUTS. I didn't mention here, the creatinine is 9. The creatinine clearance for this patient was around 52. So the post-void residue was about 150. So would you want to do a TURP, a channel TURP, or would you put this patient on archaectomy or a GnRH antagonist and wait? What would you do, Dr. Keval?
Okay, so in this case, I just forgot what it was. Creatinine is 0.9.
1.9. The creatinine
Okay.
clearance is 52 ml per
Okay.
hour.
So
And-
so I would definitely first put the patient, catheterize the patient.
Excellent.
Let the create to stabilize. Then my personal plan for this patient would be an orchidectomy along with TURP channeling in this case,
Very
because
good.
that would serve both the purposes in under single anesthesia. So my plan would be a TURP with an orchidectomy.
Excellent. Very nice plan. I think that's a very reasonable plan. Randeep or Abhishek, would you say let's put this patient on a GnRH antagonist and then wait rather than doing a TURP plus orchiectomy if the patient is not willing for an orchiectomy? Is that a reasonable option? Okay, Randeep.
Oh, yes. I mean, there is only one point. There is some data to say, though we don't have a level 1 evidence to say that GnRH antagonist or degarelix for that matter. In the initial part of the trials and studies, if you see, degarelix has shown reduction of the cardiovascular mortality, but that has been a very short 2-3 months. But later on, it does get equated when you give it for long term. So there is some advantage definitely when we use degarelix, but the advantage is not as good as you have shown this slide, because this is relugolix and this is a new oral molecule which is just approved. I mean, and we don't have the experience as well as it just came into the market in the US.
So when okay, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Randeep, please go ahead.
One more point is that when some patient is at a very high risk, I'm a bit worried, because I had 2-3 patients who had a repeat MI on GnRH analog, though we know we have to put them throughout their life, and orchidectomy is something permanent. I mean, of course, the efficacy of prostate cancer control is equal. There is no debate about that. I mean, this is just a point. Otherwise, I'm absolutely okay. It is patient's personal choice, his finances, and whether he wants to undergo the knife or not.
Excellent.
I would prefer degarelix if possible.
Correct. So I think that's a point. There are some patients who might actually benefit from an antagonist compared to an agonist, because the agonist takes a little longer time to kick in. And also, this is the first study, though you're right, Randeep, that this is an oral GnRH antagonist. But this is the first trial that prospectively showed that the major cardiovascular events were lesser when you use the antagonist compared to the agonist. So when you have somebody who's got a comorbidity that predisposes to a higher risk of cardiovascular event, higher risk of a cardiovascular event, I thought there was only one moderator for this. Never mind. So that's one situation, and where you want the effect to kick in quickly, that's another situation where you may want to use an antagonist. But in all the other situations, I think it's perfectly all right to use an agonist. But let's not forget one of the most effective therapies, which is orchiectomy. That's something that slips all our minds because we are so taken up with these drugs many of the time. So let's move on. So that's how you choose which type of therapy you want. But as was rightly pointed out, a channel TURP and an orchiectomy would be one of the best choices for a patient like this. Okay, so Abhishek and Randeep, I want both of you to answer this question. Who in your practice goes for docetaxel and why? Let's start with Abhishek.
As was initially rightly pointed out, somebody with a high volume, maybe a symptomatic disease, I would like to put him on chemo. Although, as I initially said, all the hormones and the docetaxel now can be used in high-risk disease as well. But somebody who's highly symptomatic, I would prefer to give him a chemotherapy initially.
Abhishek, I just want a question here. Let's say this patient went on a GnRH antagonist. We all know that the symptoms are going to drop like magic in a couple of weeks, if not a little more than that. So the point I'm trying to ask and make is that, when you look at symptom burden, do you think the GnRH antagonist is the reason for the symptom burden to drop, or do you think it's the docetaxel that's given and then it starts working after 3 weeks? Because you're not going to start that on day one, isn't it? So the point is, which is contributing more to the symptom burden drop? Is it likely to be the chemotherapy that's working immediately, or is it the GnRH antagonist that works even faster? What happens, Abhishek? Have we thought about it?
Probably both.
Very good. Randeep?
Sir, I would like to make one point, sir.
Yes, please. Dr. Keval.
Yeah. Okay, so in like few of my cases in who present with symptomatic like very severe bone pain or like high spinal metastasis, very burden, and about to like fracture, that is pathological fracture. In those cases, even without starting docetaxel, I have started them with GnRH antagonist, and the excellent response is seen in terms of bone pain, even in terms of PSA decline in those cases. So I personally feel that GnRH antagonist
Yes.
has better, I mean, has more
So,
role if started.
You're right. You do
Yes,
an orchiectomy, and in 48 hours, your patient is sitting up
Yes,
happily.
I
isn't it?
concur with Dr. Keval. Sir, GnRH antagonist or orchidectomy gives very immediate hormone
Absolutely.
castration. So it has to
Absolutely.
be.
All the medical oncologists, including me, are very taken up with docetaxel to give you rapid, immediate symptom relief. But both the urologists are point on.
Orchidectomy starts functioning in 6 hours castration.
Excellent.
And even LHRH antagonist 97% will have a castration in 3 days. So
Excellent.
within 10 or 12 hours they start working. And impending paraplegia or such situation when we are in OPD, one shot of it's such PSA 110 PSA, one shot of antagonist, it works magic.
Excellent. So that's the very important. Randeep, who is your patient for docetaxel?
I think the correct answer is that the patient decides. So that is the first answer I would like to make.
Okay, doctor sahab, aap decide kijiye.
Aap decide kare. Okay. So then the thing is that no, I will tell you the choice goes. I mean, in last years, it has been very medically. If you say, I have belief that AB and ENZA works better, and that is because of the overall survival of 0.63, 0.7, which is better than the docetaxel of Getek, Charted, and Latitude. I mean, if you talk about AB and ENZA, there overall survival in low volume, high volume is absolutely dot on same 0.63, 0.7, and overall intention to treat OS is better. But it goes that whether the patient wants to take oral tablets for 2 years or 1.5 years, whether he will be reimbursed. Many patients are not reimbursed, and then they say it's okay, you give us docetaxel, it will be 6 cycles in and out. You can re-challenge with docetaxel again after 2-3 years. I mean, there are many points in discussions. Sometimes patient is young, he says, I can take dosi now, AB later, and I would like to take AB ENZA. Most of them, after the cost of AB ENZA has reduced, now it is almost 80% of them are going for an upfront AB and ENZA when given a choice.
Excellent, Randeep. I think you made very relevant points that over time we have seen that the new anti-androgen agents plus the ADT seems to be producing better results irrespective of the volume, irrespective of the burden, irrespective of the risk in terms of overall survival compared to what you get with docetaxel. So, in fact, I have to confess that in my practice, I have rarely done docetaxel in the last 2 years. Almost all of them have gone on ADT plus, one of the newer anti-androgen agents, because except a retrospective analysis showing that in patients with liver metastasis de novo, when you look at all of these studies, less than 10% of patients had visceral metastasis at the time of diagnosis. So there is a retrospective real-world data analysis on abiraterone, which shows that in patients with the liver metastasis, there doesn't seem to be much efficacy. So if at all of us medical oncologists think there's one group that we may be almost always tempted to do docetaxel, that probably should be visceral or liver metastasis. Even in lung, there seems to be some good activity for these newer anti-androgen agents. So that's why I started with that question asking low burden versus high burden, because if majority of our patients are going to go on the newer anti-androgen agent plus ADT, at least from a therapeutic standpoint, systemic therapy standpoint, the significance of this low burden, high burden seems to be slowly going away. So that's my personal opinion on this side, because we keep asking our PGs, what is the first thing that you do? What's the chartered criteria? What's the latitude criteria? It's kind of going away. Maybe it's much more relevant for the surgeons and the radiation oncologists. We'll come to that a little later. We've still got about 10 minutes to go. Right.
Yeah.
Abhishek, would you like to do this, Abhishek, peace study, where you use docetaxel and abiraterone? It's giving you a whopping 2.5 years of improvement in radiological progression-free survival, no overall survival shown so far. Would you like to do this in some patients? If yes, who are those patients, Abhishek?
So not as of yet.
Okay, great. Not as of yet. Randeep?
I have not done it, but as you said, there was a similar data in ENZAMET, though that was not the primary trial. ENZAMET had also the similar combination. Now, in that, when high risk, if you see in ENZAMET, the OS curves are absolutely hugging each other.
Absolutely.
Though the PFS curve were separating like this. So then we come to that question that if you are really billing upon PFS, then actually these are those patients who may really fail. I mean, like you said, the liver is studied. Sometimes you have rarely at diagnosis. With this COVID pandemic coming, you have a patient just suddenly coming up and then you have 6-7 liver mets. We can do that. The toxicity is not very much and
Correct.
the curves are rating at a year. So if you feel that your patient may fail in a year, I may do it, but yes, this is not a standard practice. I have not done it yet.
Excellent.
But yes, there is a temptation and it is not in guidelines yet.
Absolutely. It's not in guideline, but that 2.5 years of improvement in radiological progression-free survival is too big to really, not take into consideration when we are making decisions. But I think all of us in our practice have done this, isn't it, Randeep? We have done docetaxel, and then this patient, for some reason, you think is going to fail very early. You've not left it there. You put this patient on abiraterone. All of us have our handfuls of patients like that, isn't it?
Absolutely right. After 6 cycles, you realize that
Correct.
the TS 100 has come to 20-30 and you still having apart from, your bone disease is still litting up on PSMA and sclerosis
Correct.
is not, it's better that he fails and you put them on.
Exactly. Abhishek, have you done things like that? I have done it in some patients, at least, Abhishek. Docetaxel and then followed by abiraterone.
No, sir.
No,
Not
you haven't
really.
done. You're a stickler to data, right? Fine. So this is something that we all should be aware of because, as time goes by, if this pans out into an overall survival, I'm sure this will be standard of care. But Randeep made a very important point. We still don't know how to choose our patients for an intensive therapy like this. This is a trial where there were patients with high burden disease, low burden disease. We don't know as of now which of those categories of patients actually benefited from an aggressive intent of treatment like what we are seeing on this. Any points that our urologists want to make on this data, Rupesh and Dr. Keval?
No, sir.
No,
They
you're
have
happy?
shown a good advantage, but we don't have experience of combination.
Okay, so absolutely. So we will wait for some overall survival data to use this in our day-to-day practice. This is the data that I showed you earlier. It seems to be that the hormonal therapies are taking the cake or the ball or whatever it is, the initiative away from docetaxel, at least the way things stand today in terms of data in hormone-sensitive prostate cancer. So as I said, I rarely use docetaxel today in my patient. Okay, we'll come to the local therapies. In this patient with lymph nodes as the site of metastasis, 90% of patients, when you do a PSMA PET 3 months later, 4 months later, will show that there's dramatic regression of all of these. Dr. Hemendra, would you consider this patient for either radiotherapy to the prostate, or if there is some residual lymph node sitting somewhere, would you do radiotherapy to consolidate based on those oligometastatic data that Dr. Vedang very nicely showed?
Yeah, yes, sir. As you said, sir, down the lane when you have a responding patient, and as correctly put, lymph node metastasis does better than the bone metastasis or the visceral metastasis. So if he's a responding patient and down the line you come across and you say the PSMA scan shows the lymph nodes going down, he would benefit from a local RT to the prostate. If not overall survival, it will give you at least a failure-free survival improvement, sir.
Excellent. So you would consider this patient because
Yes.
he belongs to a good prognostic group based on lymph
Yes,
node meta. Dr. Pooja?
So I agree with Dr. Hemendra Bhai, not in the upfront setting, but of course, having started the systemic therapy, if the patient shows response on evaluation, definitely we can think of adding radiation.
Very good. So at a later point in time, once you see that the response is good, patient is doing well, you will want to do radiotherapy. Let me ask our urology colleagues, is there a role for radical prostatectomy at this point in time in a patient who would qualify otherwise for radiotherapy? Are there a select set of patients that you would consider for that kind of an intervention? First, Dr. Keval and then Dr. Rupesh. This is again something that we keep debating all the while.
So, sir, I personally feel that the lymph nodes outside the true pelvis, they are to be considered as metastatic. And
they are
with
metastatic.
Such a high PSA, and with such a high PSA of more than 100, I would not prefer local therapy in the form of radical prostatectomy in this case.
Okay.
In very selected cases in which other risk factors are favorable and the burden of metastasis is less, in those cases I may prefer, but still I have not tried that in my practice. But if we go by literature, then also I won't prefer, in this case at least, radical prostatectomy.
Okay, so a very important point. This is again something that is a judgmental issue, isn't it, Dr. Keval? I do something that you spoke about very much in practice. You know, we are unhappy if your PSA is very high. We are again unhappy if your PSA is very low, right? You will say this is undifferentiated, so this patient is going to do poorly. At the same time, if the PSA is very high, as you rightly said, all of us immediately sit up and then say, you're not going to do very well. You know, the level of PSA is not as much an important prognostic factor as the level to which it will fall 4 months from the time that you start your ADT. That is a much more powerful prognostic factor rather than the PSA at the time of diagnosis. Again, I went and looked this up because I also had the same thought process as you had. Such a high PSA, it tells you that there's a lot of micrometastasis. Let's not be very aggressive on the local therapy. Dr. Rupesh, do you agree with Dr. Keval, or you have a different viewpoint?
I agree with Keval, but I would like to add a point when we are discussing with metastatic hormone sensitive prostate cancer. Suppose this patient is of low volume disease. There is a recent, probably in European Urology, May 2021, they had shown local treatment of metastatic prostate cancer trial. They had compared surgery versus radiation versus no local treatment for a low volume disease. Right. And they had showed a clear-cut advantage of local treatment, either surgery versus radiation, as compared to no local treatment. Correct. Only for a subset of patients with the low volume metastatic disease. Correct. And again, head-to-head comparison with surgery versus radiation, surgery is little 15% more favorable as compared to radiation, in such point that patient will require some form of urological treatment later on. So no local, some urological intervention either in the form of PCN or channel TURP or SPC. So overall quality of life point of view, and they have shown 2-year survival data. So probably down the track in 2025, there would be in the guideline, maybe if positive results trial come, that either radiation, either surgery, some form of local treatment should be the part of low volume metastatic disease. And the recent trials that they have shown 2 years survival data.
Right. So I think most of these surgery versus radiotherapy are, pair matched or, propensity score adjusted comparisons that they have done. And I think there's always a bias that you have whenever you're looking at retrospective data, because the good patients, good in so many ways go for surgery, and the bad patients most of the time end up taking radiotherapy, which also reflects on the overall survival. So I think still, until we have some randomized evidence that one is superior to the other, most of the time in patients who are otherwise not symptomatic with lots of LUTS, we tend to prefer radiotherapy as the local treatment as things stand today compared to prostatectomy. But you're absolutely right, Dr. Rupesh, that at some point in time, there might be an edge to surgery over radiotherapy depending upon certain subsets of patients. So I think we'll have to ultimately choose what you want to do for that particular patient. This is something that I want all of you to guess whatever it is. This is a slide that I've taken from the discussant of the PEACE study. Randeep, how do you think in the future we'll be handling this? How do you think we will personalize? Is it what criteria do you think we will use? Just your gaze into the future. And I'm coming to the close.
So, Dr. Senthil, I did tell you that if I really feel that this patient is going to fail badly in a year, I may think of the triplet combination.
Right.
But frankly, I would like to wait for at least for the results to mature a bit. I mean, maybe another 2 years or so to adapt it. But yes, definitely, if someone is really a visceral is, liver. I mean, we are always worried about liver. Correct. And I even had sometimes peritoneal disease patients going into subacute obstruction while they were on Abi and Enza. I had 2 such patients. I mean, in them, I realized that maybe it was better. I would have done a triplet, cytoreduced, and then continued Abi.
Correct. So this is a nice slide that's showing that irrespective of what curve you look at, there's always a poor risk in that curve and a good risk in that curve. So hopefully in the future, I think we will learn more about biology. Though we speak a lot about biology, I don't think we know how to use that in day-to-day practice in order to make decisions for our patients. But I'm sure over time, genomics, molecular data, all this that we are looking at now will help us choose our patients better for, instead of saying low burden, call it by a different name and say this patient might need only ADT, this patient might need, doublet, and this patient might need triplet, and so on and so forth. Hopefully a day like that will come. I'm sure it will come in our lifetimes wherein we can do better choices for our patients. Is there anything else that any one of our panelists wants to say before I summarize?
Summarize.
Okay, great. So sir has ordered, so I will summarize.
Not
So-
ordered.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure to be ordered for you. Never mind. So my summary is this. GnRH antagonists are to be used in select situations. Please do not forget orchiectomy. It's a very, very important, valid option. It's very relevant even in today's practice where patients probably can afford a little better than what they were. From a systemic therapy standpoint, low burden or high burden, I think does not matter much. But for a local therapy standpoint, if you're choosing radiation to the prostate or sometimes oligometastatic sites, I think it matters. Some areas are gray, like the lymph nodes that I showed, as to where they actually fit in terms of risk and burden. So this is something that we need to be cognizant about. Numbers in terms of the hazard ratios favor the newer hormonal agents with ADT compared to docetaxel. And so docetaxel, in my opinion, is kind of being pushed a little far away. But there are always certain patients who are candidates for docetaxel, very young patients, visceral disease, and so on and so forth. Consider radiotherapy of the prostate and oligomets. I think that was the debate that we had. But I think the future is to be able to personalize therapy based on clinical and lab biomarkers so that we can do the most appropriate thing for our patients and give them the best outcome that we can. With that, thank you, Chirag. Thank you, Dr. Kshitij. That was an excellent panel, lovely panelists who answered all my questions very, very patiently. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rajappa. It was an excellent science discussion. Now
Thank you,
come to
sir.
the earth. I just searched for the cost of the cancer, prostate cancer in India.
Right.
In one of the blog, it is about $8,000 per year. $8,000 per year for the cost of the prostate cancer treatment. Now it includes many things, but when we are discussing this, and when there is very little difference in the 2 or 3 different types of treatment we are discussing, for ADT, the first choice for the Indian patient should be those who are not affording, those who are not in a high income group, and those who are to be benefited by the government support should be orchiectomy, because it is one of the best treatment as far as the lowering of the androgen level is concerned. As far as the anti-androgen is concerned, even the cost has gone down from 1 lakh of Zytiga about 5 years back to about 15,000 rupees per month, and enzalutamide about 22,000 per month. It is around 1 to 2 lakhs rupees per year for a patient. So for this particular reason, as one of our panelists and you have also mentioned, that economics is very important in deciding. If the patient is good performance status, can tolerate docetaxel nicely, and it is given by medical oncologist under his supervision. It is, I again try to, am repeating, under the supervision of medical oncologist with a good control of the toxicity control later on. Docetaxel for the Indian patient, for the setup we have, which I have discussed now, for the hormone sensitive patient, if I have to summarize, everything science is okay. There is no question as far as the what is the better or what is good or bad. But for the Indian patient, if we can manage with the orchiectomy and docetaxel, particularly high volume, not in a low volume I like to use, but in high volume, it is a good economical treatment, can be affording, it can be affordable and can be given in most of the government scheme at present. Senthil, it was an excellent presentation.
Absolutely agreed, sir. Absolutely
and
agreed.
I learned that the nodal disease, and then I reminded one of my oldest patients who came with a cervical node, and he lived for 15 years. He was not having any more disease. And as you have mentioned, one more thing, that if the low PSA, usually my observation is also there, if there is a low PSA and patient having a progressive disease, that is a bad disease. Thank you very much. It was excellent evening feast of the good academic. Chirag and HOC, thank you very much. Thank you, Rajappa.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj Shah, sir, for your words of wisdom. Dr. Senthil, it was a treat to hear you moderate as usual. Thank you, all the panelists, Dr. Keval, Dr. Abhishek, for pitching in the last moment, Dr. Randeep, Dr.